Today we're covering 5 deck lists for the 5 Mechanologist heroes for the Commoner format in Flesh and Blood. If you are someone who's interested in Commoner and you want to see more classes covered, please let me know, because I don't know how much of a demand there is for Commoner content. This is just me, finding something Mechanologist related for the channel for the week. And if you want to see other heroes covered, by all means let me know. I can absolutely come up with a list for every single hero. So we got a lot to cover today. I'm just going to include all these into one video. I don't think there's really too much to talk about, so I'm not going to break these uploads up. We're going to jump into Dash.io first. So of course, Dash.io wants to play items off the top of the deck. You have the ability to dig a few cards each turn using your boost mechanic. Boost, of course, is something that banishes the top of your deck, and if it's a Mechanologist card, the attack gets go again. Your major payoff is your Symbiosis shot, getting counters to attack your opponent when you play an item into the arena. So if you can play an item a turn, you can then shoot your opponent for 2 damage without having to pay any resources. Very powerful card. The equipment here is pretty standard. We're gonna be running Achilles accelerators, Cogwork base arms, hardened cross strap. These just allow you to be super aggressive, to make your attacks cheaper with your chest piece if you want, to make them stronger with your arms, or just to get extra pistol shots in at the end of the game with the Achilles accelerator. And when we look at the list here, we're kind of running a pretty tight ratio, trying to have enough items that we're seeing them every single turn. They're gonna be in your hand sometimes, and it is a little bit awkward to play them from your hand, but it's no big deal. And that is why we're running the Cogwork base arms, is we're able to run Evo Cog Spitter that lets us put an item into the arena for free. So not only powerful, but fixes a bit of your problems. We have Scrap Harvester in a blue. This is the only thing that might be a little bit out of the ordinary. This just lets you put extra counters on some of your Steam items if you really want to. Your sideboard is just for decks that want to block you out a lot, so it's gonna be Overload Script plus Payload. You put these in your deck, and then you have a bunch of boom grenades, right? So when these go off, in quotes, they're going to deal a bunch of damage to your opponent. So into everyone else, you just hit them as hard as you can with a bunch of attacks into decks like Guardian that can block you out until you eventually run out of cards, which is definitely always a possibility with boost strategies. You have ways to push through them and deal a bunch of damage. So feel free to give this one a shot. The only other interesting kind of fun inclusion is Talismanic Lens. You can experiment with this if you go first or second. Maybe you even like it more than just being able to block one. Just being able to opt and try to find an item really early in the game is pretty cool. So that's Dash.io. Now we're going to go into the original Dash. I actually think the original Dash is honestly probably the least exciting now with the Commoner changes, with all the new cards and bright lights. Because originally you would just kind of play original Dash, right? So the Dash that gets to start with an item in play from Arcane Rising. You just played with Hyperdriver instead of, Teklo Pounder. If you're from, playing CC or Blitz and you're familiar with Dash in those formats. And she was quite strong in Commoner, but now that Maxx exists, there's not really a reason to play her, in my opinion. But of course, this is still putting a deck list out here. But when we look at the Maxx list, it will be kind of similar, so it was kind of hard to find a distinction between the two. But regardless, here is the list. So we have Talishar, right? So we can hit our opponent a bunch of times and then come in for 4 damage at the end of every single turn. It's quite powerful. Starting with a Hyperdriver in play just means we get 1 free resource every single turn for the first 3 turns of the game. If you're familiar with Dash and you know how our play patterns work, or you're watching this video for the first time and kind of seeing how these deck lists work, right? You have a 1 for 4 with Go Again, you have a 2 for 6 with Go Again, you have a 0 for 4 with Go Again. The whole point of boost is that all of your attacks have Go Again. So you can tell that this deck wants to go really hard, really fast, super aggressive. So being able to send 4 damage to your opponent every single turn is just, it's an added bonus for how hard this deck likes to hit. Goliath Gauntlet is probably gonna be your preferred arm piece, although we have some blocking equipment in here as well if you really want that. And if you're going first, you can run Plasma Barrel Shot, and then that way you can just put a counter on it, arsenal and pass your turn to your opponent. And then this lets you attack, sometimes up to 4 or 5 damage for free, because you just remove the counter. You paid for it on your first turn when you didn't really have to do anything anyway. Super strong, very powerful. Running some cards that put extra counters on your Hyperdriver. You only have 1 in the game, so being able to keep it around is pretty nice, right? If you're able to boost a Big Bertha or a Crankshaft. We have a Blue Recharge as well if you want to, play that. If you're going second or something, or it's just in your hand and you just want to play it. So little bit of flexibility here, and the rest of it is just, going hard, big aggressive cards, doing lots of damage. Your inventory is once again 3 payloads. That's just going to be kind of the standard, and then a backup protocol, so you can get your big attacks back into the slower decks. Now we're going to jump into Maxx here. So I guess the main difference between Maxx is that in this deck, I'm playing a bit more pumps, like a bit more of the bright lights cards that buff something like your next attack and do something with your hyperdrivers. So, there's a little bit of distinction there. So you may like the play style of, Maxx or Dash, but there's something distinct there as well. So Maxx, of course, after you boost, you can pay 2 and you can make a hyperdriver, and then your hyperdrivers get crank. So after you play it, you can decide to remove a steam counter from it, so it goes down to 1, but then you get an action point back so you can continue your turn. The only reason why you want to do that is for Banksy. So Banksy comes in for 3 damage, but you can only do this if you cranked. So there's some interesting play patterns there, right? So the whole point is that you want to boost, you want to make a hyperdriver, and then you want to swing with your Banksy. So typically what you're going to do is you're going to pitch like a blue, and you're going to play a 1-cost boost card right after you make your hyperdriver. So then you are at 3 resources because you get your resource back, which is pretty cool. And then, so you have 3 resources, use 2, you make your hyperdriver again, use the last one to swing your weapon, and then next turn you do it all over again. Of course, you can keep some more cards, right? And then you can play some of these bigger hits. So these 2 costs, you can play, like rev up and throttle pump card, play something big, hit your opponent. So it's kind of cool because it kind of flexes in between, like you can play a bit of a blocking game, a bit of an aggressive game, or you can just go hard in one direction, right? So, being able to give +4 to Combustible Courier is pretty sweet, right? Your sideboard is just some bigger attacks like Big Bertha, so you can bring this into, for instance, like Illusionist or decks that want to block you, right? So like Guardian, your bigger attacks are harder for them to block out, and some more pumps that you can run as well, along with an overload script. Data Doll is quite fascinating, especially with all the new cards available. So Data Doll is probably the most interesting hero ability, but with one of the biggest downsides. So whenever a Mechanologist item you control is boosted, you put it directly into the arena rather, than like in the banish like you would normally boost. So super powerful, right? As long as you're boosting items from your deck, you get to play them for free, which is incredibly powerful. So, but there's a catch. You'll notice that Data Doll is the only hero in the game that has 3 intellects. So for those of you familiar with the rules, you draw up to your intellect at the end of your turn. Every single hero in the game has 4 intellects, so it's really common knowledge that you just draw 4 cards at the end of your turn. But because that is technically a rule, Data Doll has 3, so you only draw 3 cards a turn, which is pretty hard. It means that you can get hit really hard. It's hard to deal a lot of damage, but there's a really high upside, right, where you manage to draw 3 boost cards, you play 3 boost cards, and each of them hit an item, right? And then you essentially got 6 cards in your hand, which is pretty sweet. And your hope is that you're going to hit these items off the top of your deck, and if you do hit them off the top of your deck, they're quite powerful, right? These are very strong effects. And then you can even crank them and get extra action points, which allows you to attack with the pistol a couple times, because as long as you have extra action points, you can always reload and refire your pistol. It's an exception to the rules in terms of weapons, because its attack is not once per turn. And we're also running Evo Cog Spitter along with the Cogworks base arms, so you're able to, every once in a while play them, get some block on them, and then also just be able to drop a free item into the arena for free, which is pretty cool. We're running the base chest here, which is a little bit different. The main reason why is because if you look at the rest of these lists that are running the Hardened Cross Trap, it's because they all have big 2-cost attacks, so you have a way to just use your Cross Trap and then play a 2-cost attack for free, right? So being able to just play Throttle for 0 mana, resources, whatever you want to call it, is quite strong. But when you go into Data Doll, we actually don't have any, attacks that really cost anything. So just being able to grab an extra resource, which we just use for extra pistol shots, is all you need. Our sideboard is just more stuff for decks that want to, continue to block you out. So we have Scrap Harvester that lets you put an extra steam counter on something like Overload Script while also attacking for 6, right? So pretty cool, right? You can keep your Overload Script around for a few extra turns. Also, is trying out a hyperdriver just to see if that's interesting or not, right? Lets you set up a little bit into slower decks, right? So you can get all 3 uses of your hyperdriver, whatever you use a resource for. I don't really know, but we're trying it out. And finally, we're Teklovossen. So Teklovossen has some pretty cool play patterns. Your main thing is that you want to get evos into your banish zone. So these are the upgrades to your arm pieces, or in this case everything. So we're gonna try to get 4 evos every game if we can, and the main reason why is that lets our weapon become quite powerful. So our weapon gets stronger with the more evos we have, and at the end of the game when we have enough evos, it becomes a 1 for 3 attack with go again. So our game plan here is to be a little bit more defensive, and we're trying to trade back and forth with our opponents. So you're going to block with maybe like 2 cards, maybe you're going to attack with 2 cards. So it's a lot slower and is going to play very differently than the rest of these decks, right? The biggest thing you see off the bat is that we're running generics, right? So there are some boost cards in here. You can play them if you feel like it's the appropriate time to, gamble on if you think that the top of your deck is, a mech card. Sometimes you just got to go for it. But kind of the purpose here is that, these are just big attacks that you can just play, right? So late game, after you are able to get these equipped onto your base pieces, I mean, these are just gonna be defensive and blocking, but you can pitch a blue, attack for 3 with go again, and then you can display any of these 2 cost attacks. So it means you can block with 2 cards and then attack for, like in this case, you would attack for 9 with 2 cards. So you can block 6, attack for 9. We have some other decent ones in here, right? You can just throw 7 when you need to. Same with Junkyard Dog, allows you to just attack for 7, but also be able to scrap an Evo into your banish, which is pretty cool, right? Because then you can play it with Teklovossen's ability. We also are running Wounded Bull because you're going to be on the back foot most of the game. So it's going to be pretty likely that you're behind on life for most of the game. So having this option here is pretty cool, right? And you're just going to play like a pretty interesting, more defensive route. This is definitely gonna be better for people that like, a little bit more control style gameplay. And in our sideboard here, we have a really good D-React, right? Being able to block 8 if it's in your arsenal. And then we have Oasis, which is pretty good into, for instance, like Wizard, but even into things like Mech, right? So Oasis can target anything. So if you target Plasma Pistol, or if you're playing against, Dash IO, it can target the Symbiosis shot, and then even if they fire multiple times, you don't take any damage because it prevents 4 from that single source. Some other things here are just going to be better defensive tools, so these are generics, right? So a little bit more reliability if you do decide you want to boost for things, but boosting can sometimes just be helpful regardless, because if you boost away, for instance, any of these Sentry bases, you can then immediately just play them on a banish with Teklovossen's ability, and then you just get to power up, become stronger, more defensive, and then your weapon becomes even more powerful, and you get this really cool endgame. So those are all 5. These deck lists, of course, will be available in the description below. So if you want to try them out for yourself, get them going at your LGS, feel free to do so. Let me know what you think, and if you would like to see more classes covered, I can just do full class videos, right? So we can just cover all the wizards in Commoner, all the rune blades, etc. But until next time, thank you for watching.